Hey everyone, I saw the movie Heretic, starring Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, and Chloe East. And despite one particular criticism I'm going to level, overall I thought it was really good. It was thought-provoking, the dialogue was great, and I thought all three of the main actors, Grant, Thatcher, and East, all did an amazing job. I'll even go as far as to say this might be Hugh Grant's best performance yet. But this isn't going to be a review, and I'll do my best to avoid spoilers. But before I get into my criticism, I feel like I should probably offer at least the basic gist of the plot for the sake of context. And this is all stuff you can easily pick up on by watching the trailers. So Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East, who I learned actually grew up in the Church of Latter-day Saints, play a pair of young LDS missionaries who go to people's doors and try to convert them to Mormonism. And they end up going to Hugh Grant's character's door. And I could be wrong, but I think the movie implies the visit may have been prearranged, that his character previously showed interest in learning more about the church, and so they arranged to have the missionaries visit him. As I said, the movie's really good, at least in my opinion, and other people have been raving about it. But it's a bit of a slow burn, and a lot of the tension is psychological, and the real action doesn't come in till later. You have Hugh Grant's character, Mr. Reed, continually trying to challenge the faith of these two young missionaries. And on a side note, I haven't looked into what inspired the story, but I found myself comically wondering if it came from that disdain or annoyance many of us have probably experienced when faced with an unwanted knock on the door from a missionary, pollster, or door-to-door salesman, whatever. If you're an atheist, maybe you've even fantasized, about inviting them in and trying to turn the tables, see if you can deconvert them or get them to question their religion. I think I may have had that fantasy pop into my own head once or twice when I was a younger, more outspoken atheist, but I think I've mellowed significantly, and now I'm like, if you have a belief that helps you get through this vale of tears and you're not hurting anyone, good for you. But at one point, while trying to get these girls to question their faith, Hugh Grant's character starts giving a mini lecture, rattling off all the similarities different pagan gods from the past supposedly had in common with Jesus, implying that Jesus is just another mythic figure. It sounded like stuff right out of Zeitgeist. If you're not familiar, Zeitgeist is a documentary series made by independent filmmaker Peter Joseph. The films are widely viewed as being chock full of or promoting conspiracy theories, but they've enjoyed a certain amount of underground success or popularity. The first installment or original film came out back in 2007. It's broken into three parts. The second part deals with 9/11, the third part deals with the Federal Reserve, and the first part, which is relevant to the topic at hand, promotes the Christ myth theory. As I've said on the show before, as a non-believer, I'm somewhat agnostic on the historicity of Jesus. I have no problem believing he was an actual historical figure, which I believe is the scholarly consensus, but I also leave the door open to the possibility that he may have been some sort of semi-mythical composite figure. I have a love of mythology going all the way back to my childhood, and so I'm aware that the ancient religious landscape was littered with stories of dying and rising gods. But if you're going to make comparisons to Jesus, I think you should at least have your facts straight and know what you're talking about. And that was the problem with Zeitgeist. It touted or helped popularize these fringe mythicist claims that should seem pretty iffy right off the bat if you're at all familiar with world mythology. I believe Peter Joseph's mythicist claims came from his interest in the works of D.M. Murdoch, who went by the pen name Acharya S. Sadly, she passed away from cancer in 2015, I think it was. I didn't agree with her work or her claims, but she seemed like a nice person, and it's always sad when someone passes away like that. Some of you might be familiar with New Testament scholar Professor Robertmprice. I'm not sure if Price considers himself an atheist, but he's well known in atheist circles, and I would consider him a more grounded and responsible or reliable kind of mythicist. Price was very critical of Murdoch or Acharya S at first, but I think he felt bad about how harsh he was on her and her work, and they actually ended up becoming friends. So Peter Joseph was influenced by Acharya S, and she herself had been influenced by the work of Gerald Massey, a 19th century English poet and writer who became interested in ancient Egypt and tried to draw parallels between ancient Egyptian myth and religion and the gospel stories, particularly supposed similarities between the Egyptian god Horus and Jesus. But to come back around, when I was watching Heretic and got to that part, I was like, someone's been watching Zeitgeist. I believe Bill Maher has also regurgitated some of the mythicist claims from Zeitgeist, specifically in his film Religulous that came out way back in the day. But yeah, it's strange. Once again, I really liked the dialogue in Heretic. I thought it was a very cleverly written script, but that one part with the mythicist claims just stood out to me like a sore thumb. But I'll play the audio from that part of the movie, and don't ask me how I got it.
The story of a savior who was born to a virgin, who could perform miracles, and was supernaturally resurrected was a very popular story for at least 1,000 years before Jesus was born. Mithras performed miracles, he was marked by the sign of the cross. Horus walked on water, was crucified, had 12 disciples. Krishna, he was a carpenter, born to a virgin, baptized in a river, rose from the dead, and ascended into heaven. This little gallery depicts 12 gods who were born on December the 25th, all of whom predate the existence of Jesus. I am sorry, but it is impossible to ignore the influence of one narrative upon another, or to ignore the fact that all these stories iterate into Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Can you imagine thousands of years from now people accepting Jar Jar as a significant religious figure?
Okay, the end part was pretty funny. And don't hold the audio quality against me. It was the best I could procure. But I'll go over the claims Hugh Grant's character makes. Mithras performed miracles, was marked by the sign of the cross. Okay, performing miracles, big deal. It would probably be strange if a god couldn't perform magical acts. The Mithraic Mysteries, or the Cult of Mithras, was a very popular mystery religion in the Roman Empire. It was considered a serious competitor of Christianity. Mithras was essentially the Roman version or interpretation of the ancient Persian god Mithra, but there are a number of differences. For instance, one of the most central themes of Roman Mithraism is the god slaying of the cosmic bull, a kind of creation myth in which Mithras reluctantly kills the animal. It's through this sacrificial act that the world is brought into being. Strangely, however, this story seems to be absent from tales and beliefs concerning the older Persian version of the deity. The claim that he was quote-unquote marked by the sign of the cross is also strange. Followers of Mithras were said in some accounts to have been marked on their foreheads with some kind of symbol or symbols. Even if true, that's the followers of Mithras, not Mithras himself being marked. Some statues of Mithras are described as having globe-like bases marked with a diagonal cross. That's still quite different from the idea the deity himself had been marked. I'm surprised they didn't trot out the virgin birth claim. Some mythicists will describe Mithras as being the product of a virgin birth, a bit of a stretch in my opinion. According to myth, he was born from a rock. Next, Horus, crucified, walked on water, had 12 disciples. I believe this one is straight out of Zeitgeist, kind of like straight out of Compton. I remember as a fan of Egyptian mythology, having a WTF moment when I was first watching Zeitgeist and they claimed Horus was crucified. We've probably all seen images of Horus. He's usually depicted as either a falcon or a falcon-headed man. The Egyptians had been worshipping Horus for thousands of years. It's thought his worship goes all the way back to prehistoric Egypt. And over time, different variations of Horus developed. And things like the identity of his parents or of his spouse could differ between versions. But the most famous version of the story is that he was the child of Isis and Osiris. The god Osiris was murdered and torn apart by his jealous brother Set or Seth, and his parts scattered. Isis finds the parts and reassembles them, with the exception of one part, his phallus, which according to some versions was eaten by either a crocodile or a fish. Isis replaces it with an artificial phallus she had fashioned. She then hovers over the reassembled body of Osiris, I believe over the phallus specifically in some accounts, in the form of a bird, a kind of magical act of copulation, and this is how their son Horus is conceived. And some mythicists have tried to draw parallels to Jesus by describing this as a virgin birth, which once again is a bit of a stretch to me. The mythicist idea that Horus was crucified seems to stem from imagery of the god with his arms stretched out in a kind of T or cruciform pose. It's a huge leap to jump from that, which could have multiple interpretations, to that he was crucified. The idea that he rose from the dead, another stretch in my opinion, might come from the fact that Horus eventually took on the traits of a solar deity. He was described as being reborn each day, his right eye being the sun, and his left eye damaged or lost in a battle with his uncle Set, being the moon. Horus walked on water. Never heard or read anything to that effect. Horus was a war god and a sky god who later, as just mentioned, also became associated with the sun. There were several different Egyptian gods associated with the water, but not Horus. I guess technically, and keep in mind we're talking about a mythical figure, that doesn't mean he couldn't or didn't walk on water, but once again I've never heard any such stories pertaining to Horus and couldn't find any online. The general consensus seems to be that it's just BS. Horus had 12 disciples, another weird mythicist claim. There were these mysterious semi-mythical figures known as the followers of Horus, a term supposedly used by or used to refer to these early Egyptian kings of Upper Egypt that predated the dynastic pharaohs. Not much is known about them. Online there's claims that Horus may have had 4 followers, 16 followers. I read one claim that he had 12 harpooners. Not sure if there's any truth to that. But nothing about 12 disciples. Horus was a royal warrior god, not some itinerant preacher with a band of disciples in tow. Okay, next. Krishna, carpenter, born to a virgin, baptized in a river, rose from the dead, ascended to heaven. I don't believe Krishna was a carpenter. He did have a mortal upbringing. His biological father, Vasudeva, was supposedly the king of an ancient Indian clan known as the Vrishnis. Hopefully I'm not butchering these names. His foster father, Nanda, was the leader of a tribe of cowherds, and I think Krishna himself is sometimes described as having been a shepherd boy in his youth, whereas Jesus is often referred to as a shepherd in the metaphorical sense. Krishna was not born of a virgin, but he did have a miraculous birth and conception. He's considered one of numerous incarnations of the Hindu god Vishnu. According to some Hindu texts, such as the Mahabharata, Vishnu impregnated Krishna's biological mother, Devaki, who was not a virgin, by implanting her womb with a single black hair, and a white hair which would become Krishna's older brother, Balarama, who while still a fetus was transferred to a different womb. Krishna was born in the prison where his parents were kept. Upon his birth, the cell was filled with light. The guards fell asleep, and the chains binding his biological father, Vasudeva, loosened and the door swung open. I don't know of any Hindu accounts claiming Krishna was baptized, but I was doing some research and I did encounter an interesting fact. Apparently, there was a man by the name of Krishna Pal or Krishna Paul, who was a carpenter, became the first Indian convert to Baptist Christianity. He was baptized in the Ganges in the year 1800 CE or AD. Obviously, CE or AD if we're talking about Christianity. There was no Christianity before. Anyway, this makes me wonder if maybe someone just confused Krishna Pal with Krishna himself. I don't know. He ascended to heaven. Well, as the story goes, Krishna's mortal form was killed when a hunter accidentally mistook his foot for a deer and shot it with his bow and arrow. It said his soul then ascended to the divine abode. In some accounts, Krishna's body is cremated, but his heart remains intact and burning, and is turned into an iron rod. Remember that time Jesus was shot in the foot by a hunter? Me neither. Then coincidentally, I was recently watching a Deep Fat Fried video. That's the podcast The Amazing Atheist hosts with his brother and friend Paul. And Paul made the claim that Horus was a carpenter. For context, they were reacting or responding to a Christian content creator who was attempting to debunk claims made by Mythicists. For YouTube viewers, please pardon the watermark or QR code. It's right over Paul's face in the lower left-hand corner.
Like Jesus's life conforms to the hero's journey.
Yeah.
It like Mithra, Dionysus, Horus, they don't share every attribute with Jesus. Like every attribute of their lives is not exactly the same. But like Horus, for example, was the son of a carpenter and learned the trade of carpentry himself. Horus did die and was resurrected. So they're like all these commonalities cobbled together from other pagan religions in the region and from without the region.
I'm a fan of their show and I like Paul, but that's the kind of little stuff that gets under my skin. The casual confidence with which he blurts out something so factually wrong. Horus and Osiris were both carpenters now. What orifice did he pull that out of? Imagine that father and son duo showing up to do work on your house. And so, just to reiterate in closing, I'm an agnostic atheist. I don't believe in the divinity of Christ. I think there are some parallels you can draw between Christ and certain mythological figures. But if you're going to do so, the comparison should be valid and factually accurate, not complete fabrications and grasping at straws. Anyway, as always, thank you everyone for listening, and until next time.